At some point, you may find yourself needing a loan for, say, a car or a large appliance, and chances are you'll go to that car dealership or even a credit union, and both of those entities generally still use simple interest loans. And so it would be nice to have an idea of what those loans would look like so that you can fit them in your budget easily, or at least more easily. So how can we do that? Well, we are going to look at 3 functions today that help us figure out, first of all, what the payments will be, and then inside of those payments, what is the interest that we're actually paying, and what are the payments on the principal that we are actually paying. And along the way, then we could determine how long that loan needs to be and maybe a range of what the interest needs to be as well. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's look at simple interest payments. I have started our spreadsheet today with some of the basic information we need to determine what our payments are going to be. And so starting at A1, I have loan 2, and then in B1 I would put the name, and I'm assuming that would actually maybe be me. And then looking at A3, it says, well, what is the amount of the loan? So in B3, I'm just going to put, $10,000. So that's either an expensive refrigerator or a really old used car. I'm not sure which, but it gives us a starting place to see how this works. Now, the APR is the annual percentage rate, and I believe that somewhere between 3 and 5% wouldn't be so uncommon, but let's just put 1% here because it's easier math. You could put in your own numbers as you need to and as you understand how loans are going currently. Now, the length of the loan, and generally that's in years. I'm just going to put, 5 years for that loan. And then from here, I have some ideas of how I want this spreadsheet to look. So while the payment number isn't needed, I like to see where I am. Am I on payment 25 or am I on payment 50, for example? And so that is something that I may decide to add even if it is not required for our first function. So I can put, let's see, payment 1, and then come down to the next cell and put a 2, and then select both of those, come to the fill handle, and I can click and drag down until I get to, 5 years is 60 payments, 5 times 12. And so now I have my payment numbers all figured out. And the date due, let's say that I'm going to save up a little bit before I even take out this loan. So I'm going to start it in January 1st, 2024. And again, I can set up a pattern. So if I put 2/1/2024, then I'm showing that really it's just once every month. And so I can find the fill handle once I've selected those 2 cells and very quickly click and drag down to payment 60, which will end in, 2028. Yay! Something to look forward to. Now, what is the payment owed? And this is where we will put our first function so that we can figure out what is the payment that we need to pay every month. And then over to the right of that, I have a column for my payments. Now, that could be the actual payments that I make. It could be the date that I make my payments. That would be up to me, but I thought I would point out that maybe this is a good place for that kind of information. Well, in C8 then, for us to determine what the payment is that is owed each month, we need to go to the Formulas tab above the ribbon. It's the 4th tab here. And then when we look for payment and interest payment and principal payment, those kinds of things, we're going to go to Financial, which is about the second button there. And then we're going to click the drop down. Now, there are a lot of financial functions, but we're going to scroll down until we find PMT, that is payment. And then we simply figure out the answers. So what is the rate? Now, if you're not sure what the rate is, first of all, down at the bottom here and kind of to the right, it says, well, the rate is the interest rate per period for the loan. And it even says that, let's say you're paying quarterly, then you would divide by 4. Well, what we are going to do is, first of all, find the rate, and that is cell B4, but we are going to pay monthly, so that is B4 divided by 12. Now, I know from experience that I don't want to, as I copy formulas down, have that reference to B4 change. So I want to be sure that B4 is an absolute reference so that no matter how I copy my formula, B4, that 1%, remains the same. Now, the N per. As I come down, it says that is the total number of payments for the loan. And there are several ways that I could figure that out. I could actually go down to the bottom of column A where I have the 60 and just say, well, it's that cell. I could also say, well, the number of periods is that 5 years times, again, the number of months, 12. But if I use that B5 cell reference, I also know that I don't want that cell reference to move as I copy that formula down, so I'm going to be sure that I have dollar signs, again, absolute references here for cell B5 as well. Now, PV is always kind of interesting. It's the present value, the total amount that a series of future payments is worth now. Well, basically, what PV really means is, what's the amount of the loan? What was the amount that you wanted to take out before they added in all the fees and interest and all that? Well, I could type in 10,000 or I could reference that cell, B3. As I copy my formula, I don't want the reference to B3 to change, so I need to be sure that I have dollar signs in front of the B and the 3. Now, if I weren't recording this video, I could use F4 on my keyboard and put it in front of the B for each one of these cells that we've made absolute, and the F4 would add the dollar sign in front of the B and the row number as well. Now, future value and type, we don't really need to worry about, so we're going to click on OK. Now, something odd happens as we look at C8, and that is I have my payment that I now know is going to be just a little under $171 a month, but it's in red, it's a negative. And generally, when I look at this kind of a table, well, it's a positive number. Now, I can see how it's a negative number because if I were using this formula in some sort of a ledger, and I were really doing accounting, that this is a payment, so it would be a subtraction. But because I'm just using this as a list, I'd rather see the positive version of this number. Now, there are two ways that I can do that. I can come up to the formula bar, and in between the equal sign and the PMT, I could put a minus sign. So when I have a negative and then another negative, I get a positive. I could do that. And now I have that 170.94. Or another thing that I could do is I could say, I want to put in the absolute value of this payment. Now, absolute value is the distance of a number to 0. So whether it's negative 170 or positive 170, the absolute value for both is positive 170. So I could put in ABS, then because that is a function for absolute value, I need to put in another parenthesis to the left of the PMT. And then because I have two left parentheses, I would also need to put in a right parenthesis and click the check mark. Now, either way, I get that positive 170.94, which is going to be my payment, well, for 60 payments. And I can find the fill handle and click and drag down until I get to that 60th month. Now, at the bottom of C, in C69, I want to know what the total of all those payments is. So I could type in equals sum, or I can go to the Home tab on my ribbon and then go to the right to the editing group, which is almost at the end of the ribbon here. And in the upper left of that editing group, I could click on Auto Sum. And it says, well, is that C8 through C68? And yes, we're going to say that's close enough. We're going to press enter. So even though we want to take out a loan of $10,000, we are going to pay back $10,256.25. So we have about $250 of interest that we are going to pay over a 5-year time. Keeping in mind that my total for what I am paying for this loan is in cell C69, I'm going to go back up to the top. And in E3, I have an empty cell, but right above that it says total amount due. So to keep me from scrolling up and down in my spreadsheet all the time, I'm just going to say equals C69 and press enter. And this gives me a great reminder of the total that I am going to pay. Certainly, columns A, B, and C are all that you sometimes see, but to make this really my information that I can use, here's what I think I might do, and that is in D8, I might keep track of what I have paid. So let's say I have paid, $170.94 the first month. Now, as I keep making payments, I'm going to keep track of that total. And to do that, I'll scroll down to the bottom of column D. And since I already have a total for a column in C69, I'm just going to find the fill handle and drag it over to D69. And sure enough, it has picked up that so far in my kind of practice account here, I've paid the first payment. Well, let's go back up to the top. And in E4, I'm going to type new balance because I want to keep track of where I am. And that's certainly an easy formula to write. I just need to take the total amount due and subtract from it what I have paid in. And we're keeping that total in D69. Now I also need to keep in mind that neither of those cell references change, so I need to be sure to have dollar signs in front of the E and the 3 and the D and the 69. And then I can press enter, and it tells me, congratulations, you did have $10,256 that you needed to pay, and your new balance, and let's put that in bold, is $10,085. And so as I make progress in column D and each month I add on another payment, my new balance shows up in E5. And that is just a really great way to keep track of information for my personal use. I've decided that while knowing what the payment is that I owe each month is nice, I would like to know what the interest is that I am going to pay each month. Now, I do know that interest is kind of front-loaded. I'm going to pay more at the beginning, and then at the end, I'm not going to pay as much interest for those last months. But let's go to E7, and we're just going to type interest payment. And then, let's even center that a little bit. And then in E8, how could we figure out the interest payment? Well, in fact, it's very similar to how we first figured out the payment that was owed. So we're going to go back up to the Formulas tab above the ribbon. And interest payment is also a financial function, so we'll click on Financial. And interest payment is IPMT. So we'll select that. There is one difference here between the interest payment and then the regular payments that we figured out first. And so let's look at each one of these pieces that go into the interest payment function. First of all, the rate. Now the rate is the interest payment per period, just like it was for payment. So what is the rate? Well, it's the 1% or B4 divided by 12, because I know I'm going to pay each month. And then I also know that B4 cell reference needs to be absolute. So I'll put dollar signs in front of the B and the 4. Now here is the new addition to what we need to know to complete this particular formula, and that is per, or it's really the period for which you want to find the interest. Well, in this case, the period we already figured out because we put in column A payment 1, 2, 3, and that is exactly the information that we need for this particular piece of the puzzle. So the period in this case is the very first payment in A8, and of course that will change as we copy the formula down, so no dollar signs. Now the N per is the total number of payment periods, and that is like the payment function as well. So number of periods, well, that's B5, the 5 years, times 12. And we need to add a dollar sign in front of the B and then in front of the 5. And then for the present value, that is simply the amount that we borrowed. So that is B3. And again, I only want to put in those dollar signs. Now I could type in the 10,000, but I like to be consistent and use cell references. We'll click OK in the lower right. Interest payment, like payment, is a negative because it's something that we're paying out of our bank account. And so we can go to the formula bar. I'm going to go between the equal sign and the IPMT function and simply place a negative sign and click the check mark. Now I have that positive amount, so I know that for the first month I am going to pay $8.33. I'm going to find the fill handle and click and drag down all the way through those 60 payments. And that very last payment, number 60, I'm only paying 14 cents. So it definitely did diminish as the time went on. And then I would like to kind of keep track of how much interest I have paid altogether. So I'm going to go to D69 where I'm totaling a column, and I'm just going to use the fill handle again to copy that formula over. And look at that, $256.25. That's exactly the amount that I am paying extra here in C69 as well. I paid $10,000 for the loan and then $256.25 for the interest. And so far, everything is working perfectly. Now let's go back up to the top, because there is something else that I might decide that I want to do, because besides the interest payment, I might want to know the principal payment. And let me go ahead and go to Home and wrap the text. And so the principal is that $10,000 that we are paying back. And the principal payment function is very similar to the interest payment function. So we're going to go back to Formulas above the ribbon, click on that, go to Financial and click on Financial so that we can get the drop down, and we're going to look for PPMT, for principal payment. And it asks exactly those same questions as interest payment did. So what is the rate? Well, the rate is B4 divided by 12 because we are paying monthly. And I need to be sure to put my dollar signs in for those absolute references. What period is this function going to start with? Well, the very first payment, and that is A8. And again, no dollar signs here because I want this to adjust as I go down the column. The number of periods, well, I could type 60, or I can go to B5 times 12 for the 12 months. And I want to be sure that that reference for B5 doesn't change. So I need to put dollar signs in front of the B and the 5. And then the PV, the present value, is again the initial loan amount. So that is B3. And I again don't want to have that reference change as I copy the formula. So I'll put dollar signs in front of the B and the 3, and we'll click OK. And just like payment and interest payment, principal payment is again showing that this comes out of our bank account. And just as a reminder, I'm going to click between the equal sign and the PPMT, and I'm going to type ABS for absolute value and put in my left parenthesis that encloses the principal payment inside the absolute value function. And because I have two left parentheses, I need to have two right parentheses as well. So on the very end, I'll add a right parenthesis, and I'm going to click on the check mark, and it says, well, my principal payment is $162.60. So it's kind of interesting how your payments are split out. Well, I'm going to just double click on the fill handle here. So it fills all the way down, and you can see that I started $162.60, but as I scroll down to that very last payment, I'm paying $170.80. So I'm making most of my payment toward the principal, that very last payment. And again, I would like to know what that total is. So I'm going to go to E69, find the fill handle, and copy that formula over. And look at that. There is our $10,000, our initial loan. Now let's go back up to the top, because this may be all that you are interested in and you're very comfortable with what we have done so far, but you might also be a little leery. Does the interest payment and the principal payment, do those really add up to $170.94? Well, we can check that as well, and we're just going to call this I plus PP for principal payment. And how would we do that? Well, we can just say equals, and that would be E8 plus F8, and then I can click on the check mark. And it says, yes, that's $170.94. Now, if you are really concerned about how this works, you could even find the fill handle here in G8 and do a double click, and you can see that as we copy that formula down, it always equals that $170.94. And of course, we can find the total of column F in F69, find the fill handle here, click and drag over, and it just simply verifies that, yes, we are going to pay $10,256.25. And so the payment interest payment, principal payment, and then other columns and formulas that you add to just make yourself comfortable as you track whether you're making a payment or whether somebody is paying you can be a really great tool to have when you use Excel. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.